This is Brent Richardson, and welcome to the Business Minutia Podcast, where our focus is on the details of business that are often passed over by traditional classes and leadership training. We focus on the stories of real people who have tried, failed, and learned through their experiences and are willing to share their lessons with others. All right, Jamie, we're continuing to discuss loving what you do, and boss is a big part of that. So we got to talk about bosses a little bit this week.
And it is tough when you have a bad boss.
No doubt. Nothing makes me want to quit like having a bad boss.
Right.
So we want to talk about the different kinds of bad bosses and then give some advice on dealing with them. My recommendation, similar to when we talked about, when is it time to quit your job, I'll say the same thing here. I don't recommend running from something. I don't like running from a bad boss. And I feel like I have a reputation and a name that I've established at a company, and I'm not going to let one person tarnish that.
Right,
so
right.
I want to try to work with all kinds of people. And I also know that the next company that I tried to go to get away from that bad boss, guess what my new boss is going to be? Also a bad boss in some way,
Right.
because, or there's a chance, right? Because sometimes, especially for me, I can be idealistic and I have a certain expectation of a boss. I think I've learned that, there's all kinds of bosses.
Okay, so tough question for you, Brent, to get started here. As a boss yourself, 2 reports, what are you in the bad boss category? Would people say that you are difficult to work for?
Yeah, I in the past I certainly have been, and I'm sure I have people today that would say at times I can be. Like everybody else, I'm human, and you get hangry.
Right.
Hangry
Right.
is a combination of hungry and angry, and you get some combination like that. And when you get a couple of bad days in a row and you're not in a good mood, or you're not sleeping well, or you're not mentally taking care of yourself,
Right.
or those types of things, then you can probably be a little terse with people. And so, yeah, everybody can be.
Okay, so if you put yourself into the position of going into a new job, how do you find out if the boss you are about to work for or your potential new boss is a bad boss?
Yeah, it's such a great question. It's so hard to answer. So I'll talk about internally. Externally, I don't know that, there's much you can do. You can talk around a little bit, but there's not much. If you're changing companies, you're really moving to the company with the idea that you're going to move around and have future opportunities and other bosses.
Right, and there are websites where you can review doctors and that kind of thing. Wouldn't
Right.
it be awesome if you could
Rate my
review
boss.
managers?
Somebody needs to go create that website, ratemyboss.com. I'm terrified I'd be on there immediately for people that
Everything
I've
else
fired.
gets a star rating.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. You know, to create that website. But internally, it's a little bit different. And yeah, I mean, you do, people have a perception, right? You have an idea of what somebody's skill sets are, whether they're good or they're bad, this or that. And we'll talk about what that means, good or bad, because that also can be very subjective. Good from what perspective?
Right.
That people like or that wins, right? That's not the same thing. So for me, what I'm looking for, and I'll get a little bit of this from track record and perception, a little bit, but I'm less interested in what people think than the measurable success that has existed, right? So for me, my motivators, I want to win. Right. It wasn't this way early in my career. Early in my career, I'd like a boss that I could relate to and connect with, and that maybe we could be somewhat, mildly chummy. I don't care about that anymore. That's not a focus for me. I like winning.
now,
right?
do you listen to the gossip?
It's impossible to not listen to it.
Right.
Do you bring it into your brain and make it like a permanent fixture,
Right.
or decide, well, that's just how that person is.
Right.
That's dangerous.
Yep.
I don't do that. I try to gauge based on the person, because I tell you what, there's several bosses I've had that are some of the best bosses that I've had. One that was really good, that when I sat on the other side of the table from him, I hated him. I couldn't stand him. But I rolled the dice because I thought we were polar opposites and we would fit together really well, and we did. He respected me when I was helping him, but he was just a good he was just a shrewd negotiator.
Right.
Right. And it came across as, oh man, who would want to work for that guy? But the fact is that guy protected his team very well.
Well, and if you can work for someone who doesn't have the same strengths that you do, then you
Absolutely.
can learn from that person
Absolutely.
as well.
I want diversity there. I want to be able to work with all kinds of bosses. So I don't want to be like, well, I only have these kinds. And that's I have been guilty of that in the past. but not today, at least. I want to be able to work with all kinds of people, and I think there's value in that for everybody. So we want to talk a little bit about how to work with different kinds of bosses so you're in the same kind of category.
Well, and we've also talked about on the podcast why it's important to align with your boss on figuring out what are the measurable things that we need to get accomplished.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what that alignment process is?
So you should do this before you even take the job. Right, this needs to be a conversation that takes place before you agree to a position or take a job. Is you need to understand what does success look like in this job, and you need to hear that from the boss and understand what, if as much as you can. Now, if you're a new hire coming out of college, you may not even know where you're going to go, right? But day one, then, when you do have the opportunity, help me understand what success looks like here. I just want to paint a picture for myself of what my goals are, what my aspirations. I want to make sure that I'm achieving that success. You want to have a clear alignment on what success looks like, and the more measurable that is, the better, right? So if you need to have this meeting, and I've seen cases where I've had bosses that don't. Your boss should be having this meeting with you. Right. This is the kind of the goal setting, performance reviews we've talked about in the past. They should be scheduling this meeting with you. If they're not, you should schedule it. Don't wait and let the wind decide where things go.
Right. So when it comes to this alignment, if you're at a big company where there may be layers of bosses, are you only aligning with your immediate boss, or are you just hoping that boss is aligned with their boss?
Yeah, most cases, the boss's boss and some of those things, their priorities and goals for the year are publicly available, not publicly outside the company, but internally at least available. So you should be able to connect the dots. Well, my boss's priorities and goals are this. Their boss's priorities are this, and you should be able to see up to the top of the chain what the goals are and how that kind of trickles down and how you roll into that, right?
So are you wanting to know both the deliverables and deadlines for those deliverables?
Absolutely. It should be something that's a measurable thing. The more measurable, the better, right? Subjective kind of goals and things like that will create bad relationships with your boss and make you feel like you have a bad boss, and you don't. You just didn't get alignment on these types of things in advance.
Right. And this seems like this would be the same thing that would happen within a small company if you are being hired, right? You would want to align on what the deliverables are to make sure that person is happy with, make sure you're aligning on what you're actually doing for them. Maybe
an example would be, I've seen folks who say a goal is, I want to get better at X. What does that look like?
Right.
How would anybody know that? Right. So if you'd ask, so you need to ask yourself how.
Right.
Maybe some why questions too, but I'm assuming that's clear that what you're talking about getting better at ties into the company's objectives or your organization's objectives.
Right.
But if you want to get better at manufacturing quadratic defibrillators or whatever that is, how? Well, I want to go learn from this person. Okay, how many times this year do you need to have meetings with them? Break it down to something that's a measurable thing, and then that should be part of your goals. And align to that level of detail. If you can, align that level of detail with the boss. That's going to help you later, and especially when we get into these different kinds of bad bosses. Because we've talked about this before, and I'll reiterate it again because it's so valuable. You need to stay on what as much as you can.
Right.
What issues are way easier to navigate than who issues. Who issues start to get real personal real quick.
Yep.
And they get very subjective real fast. And you start talking about people's feelings and things like that. And then there's no winner or loser other than you're letting the wind decide whether it's going to be whatever HR thinks and things. We don't want to get into those kinds of conversations. Focus on what. And it's easier to focus on what when you have those measurable goals.
Okay, let's get into the different types of bad bosses. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, let's do it. This is the fun part.
Okay, let's start with micromanagers.
My favorite. My least favorite. My favorite to really nag on or just to trash is the micromanaging boss, right? So, and I will, maybe we'll go the other way for a second, and I'll say there are times when you do need to micromanage. I just told an employee a couple weeks ago, look, I'm going to have to micromanage you a little bit on this because I want to bring you in on something, but I can't afford it to fail at all. Right. So that's the cost of the opportunity is I'm going to have to stay on top of it a little bit to make sure it goes. And they were like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. But at least you're transparent about it. Maybe that makes it better. But I'm not talking about that kind of activity. I'm talking about the person that's on top of you all the time.
Yep.
That's calling you at 8 a.m. going, what are you doing right now?
Right.
Like, can we focus on results, please, and not effort? Because I'm not paid for effort. I'm paid for... Now, maybe there's a job out there that you have that's hourly and you're paid effort-based. Even if you're paid hourly, you probably have a certain amount of throughput or some kind of result that you're expected to deliver. And if you don't deliver that result, you ain't even going to get the hourly effort. That's going to be gone, right? So you really have to focus on on what kind of result you're going to get. And the micromanager just drains people's, your soul just creeps from your body from working for these people.
Right. And I picture the ladies that make fudge at Buc-ee's, and she's back there and she's mixing all these different kinds of fudge. And she knows what she's doing. Every once in a while, I see a guy walk over there and look over her shoulder and correct her on something or ask her a question. I'm like, she has been making fudge all day. She knows what she's doing. Back off.
Don't quote the magic to me, witch. I was here when it was written, right? Yeah, absolutely. So listen, and I've had plenty of these cases of micromanaging bosses. And the micromanaging boss there's reasons why they're the way they are,
That's
right?
right.
Sometimes, a lot of times you'll find someone who gets promoted into a position that they don't know a lot of the details of what takes place. Because if you promoted a salesperson over an operations activity, they don't know enough about operations. And so the way they may overcompensate for that would be to micromanage and really it may come across as micromanagement. In reality, they're just trying to make sure that things are successful. So,
and the same thing is true in small businesses. If it's my business and I've had to hire people to come in and help me with my business, I want to make sure that you're doing a good job, right?
Yeah.
And some micromanagement is going to take place.
We could probably do an entire episode on micromanagement. The way you beat micromanaging or micromanage, whether it's a project manager you're working with or whether it's your boss itself that you're working with that's micromanaging, the way you beat this is over communication. So you over communicate information, you overshare information, you're letting them know on a frequency and a cadence that benefits you. You go on the offensive with the information.
You set the cadence.
And you say, I'm going to provide it. And if we're late on a project and I'm getting micromanaged by a customer or something, we want to take the ball. I want to take the ball. We're going to provide you an update every day at 5 p.m. or whatever that is. And then we're going to dictate the schedule. And then then as I start to satisfy you with information there, we're going to drop that back and adjust the cadence to every 2 days. Then I'm going to drop it back to a week, and then I'm going to make this go away. So you do that by setting the cadence rather than being dictated the other direction. Same with your individual work. If your boss is micromanaging you and you start to see that, you have a couple different ways you can respond. You can be like, hey, I need you to back up off me. I can't tell if that's my feet or yours I'm feeling. That's probably not going to help you.
Right.
Don't use that language. That's an aggressive stance. But better would be to say, hey, it sounds like you're really worried about this project and it's really important. That sounds like I'm glad I'm working on it if it's that important. That's really good.
Right.
So, hey, would it be beneficial? Could I send you an update at the end of the day with where I am on this? Who's going to say no? They're going to eat that up. Now, is that annoying? Do you really want to do that? No, you don't want to do that, but send it. You'll get efficient with it. You'll get it to where it's just a couple of bullet items, right? And then work your way from there. And then see if you can back it down. Hey, is this working? Is this making, you're feeling more comfortable with what we're going? Can I give this to you every couple of days? And then work your way back from it. And once you're satisfying that control, they're feeling like they're confident that you've got control of it, they're likely going to back off. Okay, are there cases where bosses that don't? Yeah, okay, then we get into the when is it time to quit conversation, which is a little bit different.
Right. Okay, the next kind of boss would be the absentee boss.
Okay, I don't have a ton of experience with the absentee boss, but you do.
Yeah, I do.
You tell me about the absentee boss.
So I had an absentee boss at a office job that I had at one point, and I felt manipulated. I felt used. It was exhausting.
Now, when you say manipulated, we're talking about the boss is just not nowhere to be found. And
it was my job to cover for him.
Right. And you don't know where the person is or what they're doing.
No idea.
And then when you find out later that they're doing something that's not work.
That not work at all.
Now you feel, that's what you mean. You say manipulated. You feel like you're being used.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, do my job for me while I go play golf.
Right.
Or whatever that is. Right. Yeah, that's a mess. So how did you deal with it?
Well, at first I felt very used and frustrated by it. And then I got to where I was, okay, so I know that every day from this time to this time, he is not going to be in the office. So then you figure out what you can be doing that is productive use of your time during those times, because you're not going to be,
right.
He's not going to be there to see you.
You're going to get micromanaged. That's
You're
for sure.
not going to be micromanaged.
I like the absentee boss because I like autonomy.
I like the absentee boss if they're clear with me as to what is going on.
Sure, then you feel.
But don't just slip out and go drink beers every day at 3 and tell me to cover for you.
Right. And let's be clear, an absent boss is not helping you oftentimes, right? And a boss can help you a lot, tremendously.
Right.
They can help you with coaching, with visibility, with things that they see that you don't see, right? I don't know how many times I've had presentations I was about to give, and a boss would say, hey, don't use this terminology. Don't say this word. And I'd be like, what? You're crazy. That shouldn't matter. And I'd just blow it off. But I was at the same time, I'd watch somebody else during a presentation before I went up, and they would use that language, and you could see the room just, I'd be like, what is going on? Only to find out that like the week before, somebody had said that and got obliterated and run out of the room because their presentation didn't work. And you don't want your name triggering the same effect. So your boss can help you with those types of things if you can have a good give and take and transparency with them.
Okay, so what about the unorganized boss?
Yeah, I've had plenty of these, and this is a mess because there's sometimes, especially having done this for 20 years, there's times when I've had bosses that are younger than me. I have zero concern or problem with that as long as they're adding value to me. But I have had cases where I can see around a corner a little better than they can.
Right.
That doesn't mean I'm better than they are. They're way better in other skills or other areas,
right,
which is why they got that job. But I'll see cases where I can look around and be like, all right, we have a deadline coming up here in March, and you need to get your stuff together here, and nothing. And I'm seeing no evidence of that taking place because of organizational challenges.
Right, and then you have the choice of, am I going to make sure this person fails so that I look good, or are you going to be a team player and help that person succeed?
Yeah, the danger there is when failure happens, you can get shrapnel, right? It's like a grenade going off. You get pieces of that too, right? And you know, what do I like more, revenge or winning? I like winning.
Yeah.
Like, I'm more interested in winning. I'm not interested in derailing my boss's career for the sake of some, Friday night victory. I don't care about that. I want to win, right? So the way I'll approach those cases is I will maybe subtly let them know and say, hey, I know I think we have this deadline coming up in March. Can I help you? I've got some bandwidth. Is there anything I just wanted to offer the ability? Hey, when an employee comes to me proactively offer to help with something like that, not only is the answer yes, more than likely, but then immediately the next time I get in a bind and I need assistance or I'm feeling backed up, that person's the first person's name that comes to my mind that I'm going to grab first, that has some ambition, some drive, that wants to take part and wants to help out.
Well, and that unorganized boss is probably also the one that doesn't have the alignment meetings with you, right?
Yeah, you have to. You often have to proactively schedule those yourself, right? So just take it upon yourself. It's an opportunity for you to help them in that way. I don't judge them in that way. I think the younger version of me would be like, well, that's their job. They should be better at that. I'm just going to sit back and let them fail. No, because they're probably strong in areas you're not. Right. So it's your job to come fill in those gaps on the other side and help out. So
this should be a team thing.
Absolutely.
So what about the non-vocal boss?
Yeah, I've had some cases where I've had some bosses that were just extremely stoic. I had one time where I would express something that I knew would be slightly provocational, and then they would just sit quietly. Yeah. And I had to say, this is the part where you talk. We had a good laugh over it. But in reality, that person was very strategically minded. They were processing, they were thinking. But it just came across to me as, like, they're just not talking and they're just sitting there playing games with my mind.
Right.
And so what I would say here is, if you've got a boss that struggles to communicate or articulate their thought process, or maybe they're just not communicating much at all, I would say be careful about reading too much into it. You don't want to start telling yourself stories. Right? When someone's silent, sometimes we will tell ourselves stories. Very, very dangerous.
Fill in the blanks. Yeah, I do that.
Reading between the lines
for sure
can be a mess. You've got some experience with this too, because I know we used to joke about a boss that you had that would use like the ellipses a lot. So it would be, and the ellipses is the ... So they would say, well, use your best judgment ... And we would both be like, it's a trap.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what that means.
You can't ask.
Well, I will. I'll be like, and I think the older I get, the more confident I am I'll use clarifying questions and say, like, hey, I'm probably just an idiot, but can you help me? I just want to be really clear that we're aligned.
Right. And to put it bluntly, a lot of these non-vocal bosses may have a little bit of a complex where they don't feel like they have earned the job title that they're in. They don't have the answer. And they're hoping that if they do not verbalize that they don't have the answer, maybe you will have an answer that they can piggyback on and say, yes, That's it.
Well, you have a T-shirt that you like to wear that has condescend spelled out like in with
Right.
what do you call it when it's pronounced out?
Yeah.
And then underneath it says it means to talk down to.
Right.
That I feel that way sometimes when I under communicate, when I'm not communicating enough information.
Right.
I'm not doing that because I don't want to be like, okay, here's just what a computer is. How far back do I go?
Right.
And so I don't want to belittle you. So I'll give you some information. Sometimes I don't give it at the right level. Sometimes I don't provide enough information because I don't want to be condescending to you and try to explain the basics of things that you should should already know. But
Right.
then when the person asks the questions, I'm like, well, okay, I understand. Let me, and then I'm happy to answer it. So don't assume that the person's being manipulative or.
Okay, what about the no credit boss?
I hate this one. Man, this one's the tough one, right? And what do we mean by no credit boss? This is the boss that you feel like they're stealing your work. You feel like and I've seen cases where I see evidence, where they were taking my content and using it someplace else, and it's frustrating. I think you have to find ways. So the first thing I'd say, be careful about assuming intent. Right? There's all kinds of the English language between verbal communication and written communication.
Right.
It's very flawed, right? You could replace English with whatever language you want, and I think that statement still holds true. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when we as human beings attempt to communicate with each other. There's lots of things, and I think it's worse working remotely because I can't see your body language. I don't understand. So there's a lot of things that it's way worse in email. Right, which is why I think it's worse virtually. So email, It's a lot of things that can get misconstrued. I don't know how many times I've read. There's a really great Key and Peele sketch. That's probably not appropriate. There's a really good Key and Peele sketch about two buddies texting each other, and one is super angry and ready to kill the guy, and the other's just happy and he doesn't get it. And you can listen to both sides and see how the English language is being misconstrued and misunderstood. Right. So I think you can't assume intent. There can be miscommunication. There can be things. So you want to assume best case, right?
Okay, but
at the same time, you do want to publish your work. You need to get your work published, and it shouldn't be exclusively to and through your boss. You need to have it across to your peers. And the more public your work is, the more people can see your work. It's harder to take it. It's harder to go run with that. So and I'm not suggesting you go bypass your boss at all. I think that's a very dangerous play. The maybe one time I ever did that backfired. I would not advise it. I think you'd be better off I'm not suggesting you do that, but it's different to publicize your work. So for example, if you had some really good information you wanted to publish to your boss, copy your team as well.
Yeah.
Or copy other people, or let people, hey, this is really great, want to share with y'all. And then copy your boss as well. It's going to be very difficult for them to go run and get credit for the stuff when everybody else is very publicly can see that was the work that you did. Right.
What about the boss that is impossible to please?
The reward you get for good work is twice as much work.
Right.
And that's how it feels. We don't stop and celebrate. We just go, okay, why can't it do this? Man, I remember when I first started work, I was working on this piece of equipment, and I was asking, why can't it do this one particular thing? And the guy said, look, this thing's a dancing bear. And I was like, what? He goes, if I brought you a bear up here and I showed you it could dance, you wouldn't be like, that bear dances like crap. You'd be like, holy cow, that bear can dance. I was like, okay. So the tool can't do it. I understand. All right. So what were we talking about?
Impossible to please.
That's how we can be sometimes, I think. We just, we can get this thing to do something amazing, and then it's just never good enough. That's just the nature, I think, of it. And so I'm not too fazed by that. I'll go back to the alignment that we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly.
You have a good, solid alignment with your boss. This is what success looks like. I have accomplished all those things. Now, this example of this kind of boss should give you a little warning of why you should have a good, solid, measurable goal.
Right.
If you have a good, solid, measurable goal,
100% agree.
Then whether they're pleased or not, you have measurable success that's right there.
You can point back to.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I've had the same thing with contract positions where I said that I would edit something by this date, and I get it back to them by that date, and they're like, I don't feel like I should pay you to. And I'm like, oh, no.
Right.
We've got a contract, my friend.
Yeah, talk to my lawyer. Exactly.
What about the leading by fear? Have you ever had a boss do that?
Of course. What I would would recommend to people? What do we mean by leading with fear? Can you give an example, or what's an example we could think of that somebody would? The ones that I can think of are folks that would just sit there and stare at you with a grimacing look, or they might provoke you for shock value and then sit quietly and watch.
I think of the ones that are always there are layoffs around the corner, or I would hate for you to get stuck in the next riff, that kind of thing.
Passive aggressive kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and things like so. What I would say, I just recommend everybody to figure out how they can be self-motivated. Right? Because your bosses are going to use all kinds of different motivating tactics. They're going to do anything they can to get you to move towards the goal you've either aligned on or what they want you to do. Okay? The sooner you can figure out how to motivate yourself, the sooner you can recognize the motivation tactic, say nothing, and in your brain be like, that's cute. That doesn't help me, and I don't care. And then you can move on and achieve the success on the aligned goals that you've talked about. The faster you can get to that point, the healthier you'll be, because then you don't care about the motivating tactic that they'll use. I'm sure people that work for me, the motivation I use is connection. I try to connect with people. I use humor. I use stories. I use analogies. And I'm sure there are folks in my team and people that have worked for me in the past that just roll their eyes and be like, oh, good grief, here comes another story. Right? Because I can be long-winded.
You're on a desert island.
You're on a deserted island. And this project needs to get done on time. What are the 3 things you're going to do? So everybody's got a different tactic, and some of them work. For some people, they love the method that I use. But I guarantee you there's people that are like, nah, no part of it. I don't want any part of it, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to get those kinds of cases. And so you're going to get people that I don't respond well to fear. People who would try to use fear as a tactic, that doesn't motivate me that way. Now, I'm afraid of failure. That's a thing that I'd struggle with just in general. But that's not what kind of motivation we're talking about. We're talking about people that, when somebody tries to come at me with that, all I hear is used car salesman. I'm tuned out by it. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go quit, or I'm going to allow that person to tarnish my career and what I've accomplished.
Right. It reminds me of that movie Office Space. And he's sitting there talking to the Bobs, right?
That's a good example.
And he says, fear will only make me work hard enough not to lose my job.
That's right. I'm not trying to do the bare minimum here. So the sooner you can get to where you can motivate yourself. Right. So you're like, okay, here are the things that I want to do. And what you got to figure out, what's the thing that's going to get you waking up in the morning, fired up to go do something. And if you're waiting on your boss to do that for you, man, you're going to have a rough career. Because you're letting the wind decide, right? Each boss can be different. You might get a good one. You might get a bad one. You need to be successful independent of that.
Right. So the next one is a little bit harder to discuss, but it's the unfair boss.
Why is it harder to discuss?
It's harder to discuss because sometimes conversations happen on the golf course or beers or. Yeah. And not everyone is included in those conversations. Yeah. And it can come across as very unfair very quickly.
Well, let's be real clear about this. You're talking about race, gender, those types of things start to play in here.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's it's heartbreaking. These are the kinds of things that you just can't control.
Right.
There's only so much I can do, and I can't do anything about the anatomy that I have. I can't do anything about my skin tone. I can't do anything about those types of things. And so it can be heartbreaking, and it can be very disengaging and demotivating.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
And so now, again, I'll go back to what I said before. Don't assume, right? But I'm gonna respond to this case as if you've already got good, clear evidence. If you have evidence of unfair behavior, you need to be going to the ethics office. You need to be going to your HR folks, and you need to be making. Now, I'm talking about when you have that. You better be really clear.
Right.
You better have. But if you do have clear evidence of that kind of unfairness, you need to make sure that, because it's not just about you; it's about everybody in your company.
Yeah.
But you owe it to folks to. You owe it to the younger you, to your future generations. I think about my kids. If my kids were at this company, would I be okay with them coming to work with that kind of behavior? And you need to say something. The other part of the challenge, though, is when it's not so clear, because it usually gets real gray. You can't prove it. You can't see. You just feel it, right? Things that you can feel, you can't respond to that way.
Right.
And you can't control that. So you got to go back to the things you can control, which is the pre-aligned goals, the measurable signs of success, and then you go back to that.
Right. And I will never forget, you had a team that y'all would go out and celebrate after big wins. And at one point, y'all decided that you probably needed to do something that wasn't like axe throwing and all these manly things. And so what did y'all go do?
With that, and that's true, right? We were having a celebration, and the executive in the room wanted to celebrate with our team because we had a really good year, really, very successful. And he even said, "Look, I don't want to. We always do things that guys like. Maybe we should do something different." So we went and got our nails done. Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it. I would do it again.
But I would encourage you, if you are a boss or a manager, to, if you feel like you may be toggling the fence here on some unfair practices, try to go the other way. Try to include everybody in whatever it is you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
If everything is done over beers, you have someone in your group that doesn't drink, they're left out.
Absolutely. And early in my career, going to the steakhouse or doing things like that. Well, what about all the vegetarians?
Exactly.
But I was just culturally ignorant, Jamie.
Right.
I didn't know any better. I
totally
just
understand.
I'm from East Texas. We go to the steak was like the celebration mechanism. Right, but for the vegetarian with a steak salad, you can clearly see the steak juice is still on the salad.
I will never forget when you told me that. You took a vegetarian out to a steak restaurant, and then they just took the steak off of his salad and gave it to you.
You can see the
with
juice
the blood
on it.
still
you
on.
You can still see it was on there.
No.
Yeah. I did. We were trying to convince him to come to our company, and we got him somehow, despite all that.
That's ridiculous.
I don't think it had anything to do with
that salad for sure.
Okay, Jamie, the last example we're going to cover this week in the bad boss category is the manipulative boss. And when we talk about manipulative bosses, immediately we were both thought of Santa Claus.
Oh, yeah.
How does that have to do with this?
Santa Claus, Elf on the Shelf, that kind of thing. Because there are so many parents that will... Santa Claus is watching. You need to be good. You need to go to bed early. You need to do whatever it is that I want you to do because Santa Claus is coming to town next month. And entire December is about that. No, I want my kids to be good because they're my kids and they're supposed to be good. It has nothing to do with some fictitious Santa Claus character or an elf watching them on the shelf.
Right,
Just be good.
Yeah, we decided early on that we weren't going to lie to our kids as soon as they asked us about it. We didn't say, from birth, Santa Claus is a lie.
No.
But as soon as our kids asked about it, we were going to be honest about it.
And I taught them about the original St. Nicholas and who he was.
Yeah. That's anti-tradition, and there'll be people who won't like that. But for us, it was because we didn't want to come across as manipulative, and we wanted to be as transparent as we possibly could. So how does that relate to the bosses? A lot of us had bosses that struggled to be transparent, struggled to be honest about what the real intent was behind what they were asking us to do or whatever they were saying. And you can feel that.
Yep.
Right. We've all, from the time you got duped by a salesman,
right.
You felt this and you went, I got duped. And then your brain wired something up there, rewired to not trust people.
Right.
Right. And then from then on, your brain operates this way. Right. So you have this psychological wiring that occurs. And then when you start to feel it with a boss, you go, oh, man,
right.
I got to get out of here.
Right. If you come across as inauthentic, then I don't believe you or trust you on anything, even though you may be authentic on most things. Red flags all the time.
So how do you deal with a boss like this? Okay, the first thing I would say is it doesn't mean that they're, just because they're coming across this way doesn't mean they have ill intent for you.
Right.
It just may mean that there's parts that they can't share and that they don't have the skills to be able to explain that to you.
Right.
Like for me, I would rate, when somebody asks me a question that I know I can't directly answer, I'll say, look, it's not, please understand, it's not nothing against you. I can't share that information with you. I know the answer to the question. I can't share that information with you. When the time comes where I can share that, I will absolutely share, and I'll articulate why it was best for me not to share, but I can't share that with you. A lot of bosses won't say that.
Right.
Instead, they'll be like, I don't know. And you can tell they're lying, right? Or that they're hiding, right? And it makes it tough, right? So don't assume that they have ill intent for you. But what I would say is, as much as possible, try to understand the why behind work that's being done. If you can align on why something matters, just putting your head down and working on something because your boss says to is dangerous. If your boss asks you to do something, you should probably do it. But if you can understand why, a lot of times your boss is asking you to do something, and in reality, there might be another option that's better. Now, how do you deal with it when your boss won't articulate the why or is not effective at articulating the why is I think, how you really manage a truly manipulative boss.
Right.
And there, I will, and this just takes experience. It takes experience, a time of doing something and understanding the problems that your company faces or whatever your role or job faces. But what happens, eventually somebody will get to a point, they get to a certain level of experience where the boss is asking them to do something. And then we go, I think what you're really is after is this. And maybe you try to ask and they go, no, do it my way. And you go, okay, all right. So what I'll then do is I may come with options. I'll come, hey, here's one way, and this is what we're doing. Now, alternatively, if you care, there's another option for us to do that here. Then still let them decide, right? And that might help. Then again, you're presuming what the why is, but you're not circumventing what they're asking you to do. So that's one method that I have used in the past to try to anticipate what. But I'll also push back. I have pushed back on bosses and say, hey, I will absolutely do that. I know for me and for my team, I can motivate everybody way easier if I know why we're trying to do this. And I think you're looking around corners and anticipating this, and I just want to understand what you're seeing because I want to learn too. Most folks are not going to be like, no, I'm not telling you. They like that. That's going to be something that they're going to want to try to answer and try to help you, right? So the more you can understand that why helps with that manipulative feeling.
Did we hit all the kinds of bad bosses?
I think I'm sure there's more, right? But, maybe this inspires you to find a way to work with all kinds of people. That's really, I would say, the moral of the story, or the if I had to synopsis this thing, is find a way to work with all kinds of people, including your bosses.
Right.
Figure out ways to, and these people are not evil.
Right.
Okay?
Think the best of them.
Absolutely. Think about and then work it that direction, right? And don't think about who stuff. Focus on what stuff. What are the tangible, measurable ways you can be successful? Does that mean there are evil people out there? Then one of them might be your boss? Absolutely, right? I don't know that I've ever had an evil boss. Never. Can't say I've had miscommunication.
Right.
I've had personality conflicts.
Right.
I've had those kinds of things. I've had people that felt they needed to do things a certain way and I didn't agree with it. Learn to work with all kinds of people because you know what? That next job, your first job, you're going to be in a spot where you got a boss that's probably like that, right?
Right.
So embrace it where you are. Learn to work with it. Then you can quit. And you're leaving from a position of strength.
I love it.
Yes. Have a good week, folks.